What's the craziest thing you've seen unfold live on television before it could be taken off air censored? When I was around 7 years old in Panama City, Florida, two teenagers hacked into the local news feed. We were in the living room watching the news and it started to break up and then went to snow. Before my dad could get up to mess with the rabbit ears, the signal resolved to show two kids in a bedroom looking at something off screen. Then they looked at the camera. Once they realized they were on live TV, they started screaming and hugging each other and jumping around yelling, "We did it! We did it! Ah!" After a few seconds the signal resolved and went back to the newscaster, who apologized for the disruption. Then they just went back to reporting the news like nothing happened. That's actually kind of cute, haha. After Hurricane Katrina, the people stuck in snow at the stadium and gathered on a freeway overpass dying of thirst and hungry as heck. News saying the government didn't know where people were so they couldn't drop food and water was surreal because the news crews literally had the people on TV with captions of their locations, but nope, both local and federal government couldn't figure it out. My unit from the Marines at the time was amphibious. We got recalled from a long weekend to drive to snow from SoCal. We started packing to go and were told to turn around, the National Guard would be handling it. So we sat in the barracks and watched them sink trucks in the water trying to get through. When I was a kid, TV shows were interrupted all the time for high-speed chases and police standoffs. One time a helicopter was tracking a guy who was driving through a field. The driver hopped out of his van with a shotgun. The reporter was telling the helicopter to pan away from the shot, but they didn't. The driver then put the shotgun in his mouth and blew his head off on live TV. The camera cut and came back to the in-studio reporter, who had a defeated WTF look on his face. I swear this led to less situations like this being shown on TV. That time Randy Johnson vaporized a bird with his pitch. I was at a sports bar with my parents and half paying attention to the game when I saw the ball explode into a big poof of feathers. From Wikipedia, after the pitch hit the bird, the ball was ruled dead. The bird was also ruled dead. OMG. I was watching a live broadcast in Texas. The reporter was saying that every year the police have to burn all of the drugs that they seize in all their drug busts. It was mostly huge piles of marijuana. Probably a 10-foot high or so pile. The reporter was in the foreground and she mentioned that most of the police were off duty and volunteering to be there so that the blaze wouldn't get out of control. So all these police and this pile of weed are in the background and it is lit as the pile starts roaring into a big bonfire. Even I could tell that they were standing way too close to it. At least 30 or 40 police officers all standing really close to this bonfire with their backs to the camera. So this reporter decides to ask one of them a question and walks over and taps one of them on the shoulder. This high AF police officer turns around as this reporter is asking him something and he looks directly at the camera with these squinty red eyes and goes, "What the frick?" When I was a kid I was watching the news and saw some people in Sarajevo, I think, being pulled off the back of a truck and shot. Teenage boys and men. Never forgot it. It was daytime and I think it might have been live, the BBC or something, but it has stayed with me ever since. I used to live near a lot of Bosnian refugees who were then school kids. All of them had PTSD and or depression. They had seen their dads and older male relatives murdered while their moms and older female relatives were raped, or they experienced it too. That war was pure heck for the survivors. In the 90s, MTV was on in the background, and downtown Julie Brown was hosting some sort of pool party weekend thing. They were going to commercial, so as she was talking to the camera, saying what was going to be going on after the commercial, some dude started getting closer and started grinding up against her just as she was done. And before they cut to the commercial, she pushed the dude off her and she yelled, "Get the frick off of me." It wasn't so crazy as much as the impact of it was to television, but the Janet Jackson boob was so bizarre. It seemed completely planned and everyone was unsure as to what exactly was supposed to happen, but it seemed like something that wasn't supposed to. It was all very puzzling and then the controversy started blowing up. I didn't see it, but I remember reading all about Owen Hart falling to his death on live television. If I had been watching, that easily would have been the craziest thing I've ever seen, along with the saddest and absolute worst. When Henry Surtees was hit and killed by a wheel mid-race in the Formula 2, it just happened so quickly you couldn't process what you'd actually seen. Felipe Massa's accident at Hungary GP in the zeros. You just saw a flash of something that he was nose first in the tire barrier with the accelerator still depressed. He eventually recovered but his eyebrow never moved again. I swear I've seen it but I've never found it again. David Letterman was hosting The Tonight Show and he had a pair of ferrets on his desk. The zoo guy was talking about them and they freaked out and started running around his desk. Their leash got caught in the microphone so they started going in circles, defecating the whole time, even splashing David. They went to commercial and afterwards the ferrets were gone and David was cleaned up. I had never laughed so hard. Oh god. The LA riots were really brutal to watch on television. They tried to not show any graphic violence but sometimes it just happened. You saw a lot of footage of people looting and running up and down streets throwing things and hitting people but nothing really bad until those men caught Reginald Denny stranded in his truck at an intersection. They smashed the truck windows and dragged him by his hair, I think, out of the truck and just stomped the ever-loving crap out of him and the camera never moved. It was a news helicopter shooting down so you could see the entire intersection and it legitimately looked like you were seeing a man beaten to death right on television. And then when you thought it was over there was that kick and you just knew he was dead. You just knew no one could survive that and it was so upsetting and terrifying to see that kind of unbridled violence take place live right in front of you. And then came the helpers. A few men. One of them, a very large black man, came to Denny's rescue and the attackers scattered like stray, vicious dogs and they helped Denny. They saved his life. It was only a few minutes but until 9/11 it was one of the most dramatic things I'd ever seen on television. I wish I could provide the link, but it was a NHL game and one player fell and his skate cut the jugular of his opponent. Blood squirted out like a hose, staining the ice, sending him immediately to the locker room and a full recovery was had. When I went to look it up the next day, I clicked on the first thing without checking and ended up with my first computer virus. Apparently, sick fricks like to frick with other sick fricks looking up someone else's demise. Lesson learned. The team doctor ran out there, reached into the wound and held the artery shut with his fingers. I watched the infamous Beyonce Hit the Best Music Video of All Time Kanye moment live. I wasn't totally paying attention to the show, like I watched Taylor Swift's name read out and went back to looking down at my laptop. But I do remember glancing up from my laptop and seeing Kanye West walking up to the mic and thinking, okay, is he like on the album too? When he started "Yo Taylor, I'm really happy for you," I was like, what is he doing when he finished? My mouth was wide open. I couldn't believe it. I was never a Taylor Swift fan but my god did I really feel for her in that moment, and was so angry at him on her behalf. I kept watching to see if they would acknowledge it or throw him out but they didn't. Props to Beyonce though, when she won her award later on she graciously gave up her speech to allow Taylor to come back to do her speech. Watching the whole Academy Awards read the wrong envelope Moonlight La La Land Best Picture mix up live was pretty wild too. I remember that, because the moment they announced La La Land, it felt like the show was over and it was time to pack it up. But the TV was still on, so everyone is just gathering their coats and bringing their wine glasses to the kitchen and calling their Lyft to say they'll be home in 10 minutes, and then suddenly something is happening on stage. Lots of other answers on here that are the same as what I would say too, but one I haven't seen is Dale Earnhardt Sr's death in the last turn of the last lap at Daytona. It was crazy because it looked like such an innocuous crash. Even watching live, it didn't seem like a big deal, and so shocking when we learned he had passed away. I really enjoyed rooting for the number 3 car. After that my interest in NASCAR pretty much dwindled and went away. You know that everyone on his team that constantly pestered him to wear his neck brace over the years had to have known as soon as he hit. I, at the time, assumed all drivers had to wear them, and also thought the crash wasn't too bad. Knowing now that he never wore one, it changes things completely when seeing the crash. Anton Hubert's fatal crash in Belgium last year. The amount of carnage and debris from the cars on the racetrack was so shocking, but I was so used to seeing drivers walk away. Learning he had died shortly after was heartbreak. The reporters reporting live on 9/11. Covered in dirt, crying, swearing, telling it as it was, utterly terrifying. I would have never considered recording something so horrific, but now that it's all gone I wish I could go back and see that raw humanity again. Hanging out with some friends at a bar so we could watch the UFC on a giant screen. And then seeing Anderson Silva's leg snap in half like a twig from really up close was something. And then about half a year later, Tyrone Spong does almost the exact same thing at Glory. Also saw that one live. I have a hard time watching leg kicks getting checked now. I'm still always afraid the leg will snap. My dad and I were watching a news interview with a scientist who studies the brains of serial killers. He was talking about how the MRI scans of people who are psychopaths show different activity, and they had a comparison image of 2 brain scans on the screen to show the difference. At one point the reporter says, "Wait, I'm reading here that this is actually your brain," referencing the example of the sample psychopath brain. The scientist just responds with, "Yes, that is correct." No explanation. The reporter tries to play off the awkwardness and says something to the effect of them being out of time and transitions to the next segment. My dad and I just looked at each other like, "Huh, I haven't been able to find the video since. Please send me a link if it exists somewhere." This just happened a month ago. Not sure if it was national news, but the Cincinnati Reds announcer, during the first game of a doubleheader, got caught on a hot mic using a gay slur. I had to rewind it to make sure I heard him correctly. During the next couple of hours, the sports world blew up on the internet, and he, presumably oblivious, finished calling the first game, then started the second game. Then around the 4th inning, he faces the camera and gives an apology for what he said, told the viewing audience he might never be back, and during his apology, a player hits a home run, and he calls the home run during his apology, and then he was gone forever. Not exactly an on-air suicide or whatever, but it was an incredibly bizarre situation. Not exactly an on-air suicide. Definitely qualifies as career suicide. The weirdness was furthered by having to call a home run in the middle of his apology. Watching the luge athlete from Georgia lose control and run off the track in a practice run during the Olympics. It didn't look super gruesome on TV, but they showed the footage and you just immediately knew he was fricked up. He was going 90 miles per hour. Zero body protection. I was pretty young, so it was just a crazy example of our own mortality. RIP Nodder. ETA, I guess it wasn't censored, but it was the first shocking death footage I was exposed to on air. The Louisville basketball player who broke his leg on live television, or Gordon Hayward breaking his ankle during the first game of the season a couple years ago. Chris Benoit's tribute from WWE before he was found guilty of killing his family. As a longtime wrestling fan, Benoit was one of my favorites, and that entire week was a roller coaster ride for me. First, I hear that him and his family passes away. Then WWE does this tribute show. Then you see the heinous crimes Benoit did, and after that, WWE erase him from the company like he never existed. Left me sad, confused and angry. Mine's pretty tame compared to a lot in here, but as one of those horse crazy girls, Barbaro trying to run on a broken leg was pretty brutal to watch. I think that was a lesson to me that sometimes bad things happen too fast for a grown up to be able to shield your eyes. I watched 8 bells die on the TV at some freaking fast food place outside Six Flags Magic Mountain. Freaking terrible day. I was at the NY Rangers game when Lundqvist got hit in the throat with a puck. People who saw it on TV told me later that there was an injury commercial break, but there was nothing for those of us actually there. I've never seen Madison Square Garden as quiet as I did that night. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone was just in shock at what happened and was holding their breaths while he was laying on the ice motionless. Place erupted in applause when he finally got up. Many years ago, my local TV station would do a live 60-second spot about an hour before the news. You know, here's the stories we're working on for 6. Stuff like that. Anyway, the spot starts, the anchor mispronounces her line, got a case of the giggles, and they had to end it early because she couldn't stop laughing. There was an episode of Just Shoot Me during the late 90s about an animal puppeteer guy who's hot for Gina and makes a Gina giraffe puppet that resembled her. During the end credits, a mare puppet reads a statement. I recently engaged in an affair with Gina Giraffe that was improper. In fact, it was wrong, and I deeply regret it. I hope we can all put this behind us and get on with the business of running Magic Town. It took me a minute, but finally realized they were spoofing Clinton's confession about Monica Lewinsky. Also watched the repeat a few months later waiting for it, but it was suspiciously removed. That was probably just the syndicated edit. They cut out a few minutes to squeeze in a couple more commercials. End gags like that get cut a lot. As I watched the World Series parade in 2008, Phillies second baseman Chase Utley got to the microphone. He was like, "World champions, world freaking champions," but it was live and not on a delay. Same with David Ortiz in Fenway after the Boston Marathon bombing. Not on a delay, and his now famous "this is our freaking city" remark. It's obviously less graphic shocking than a lot of the other things in this thread, but watching the Oscars live in 2017 was really crazy. I felt something was off when Warren Beatty was hesitating to read the name from the envelope, and seeing the producers running around after that and then the guy saying there was a mistake and Moonlight won. That was a really wild ride to end the ceremony, haha. It was the night of the Tiananmen Square massacre. I was home that night nursing a sprained ankle when news coverage came up on CBS. The surreal view of the soldiers with their AKs pointing forward walking among the flames was only surpassed by Dan Rather delaying Chinese officials trying to shut him down while his production crew was transmitting the video to New York. One of the few times I ever really admired the man. I accidentally saw the video of Ronnie McNutt shoot himself with a shotgun on a Facebook Live. It happened a little over a week ago, I think. He was streaming and just suddenly took out a gun and shot himself from under his neck, so he literally exploded on screen. It almost looked fake because it was so gory. Anyway, some sick people thought it would be funny to put it out on TikTok and Instagram so children will see it. They disguise the video by making the first 3 seconds or so of like a cute animal or a meme or something, and then it suddenly goes to McNutt shooting himself in the face. Somebody sent me that video yesterday with no warning. At first I thought someone threw something at his face, and then I realized, OMG. During the 9/11 attack, all the news channels were basically showing any video they could their hands on showing the action. One channel showed a video someone recorded of the second plane hitting and said "Jesus freaking Christ" on live TV. Then the newscaster had to apologize for the language. In fairness, that was a situation where language like that was absolutely warranted. Saw Pennsylvania's Treasurer Bud Dwyer commit suicide on live TV. He pulled a huge pistol out of a manila envelope, put it to the roof of his mouth and pulled the trigger. When he pulled out the gun, people were screaming "No Bud, no Bud." As soon as you heard the bang, he was on the floor. Didn't even see him fall. It was that fast. He had been found guilty of a fraud scheme involving government contracts. He contended, right up to the minute he killed himself, that he was innocent and had been set up by the governor. Nothing gruesome like some of these, but the Houston flooding during Hurricane Harvey. A reporter was live talking about how flooded the underpass was, and during this, a car drives straight past him into the water. At least 6 feet of water, probably more. The reporter looks totally shocked at the camera and then runs into the water and saves the man from the drowning in his car. There were actually a lot of heroic reporters during Harvey. Southern Ontario here. When a teen in the 70s, we got about 4 Canadian TV channels and at least 5 from south of Lake Ontario, mostly Rochester. Late weekend nights were filled with advertising from the House of Guitars. Legendary commercials for stoners by stoners filled the air. I saw my first televised titties on one of their commercials one night and then the station went dark. Not sure, but I think it was during Wolfman Jack's Midnight Special. Trivia question. Clap for the Wolfman was a hit song. Can you guess who recorded it? I saw what you did there. Jarvis Cocker pulling a Mooney in front of Michael Jackson at the Brit Awards was pretty funny. Madonna and her cape was a second funny one. This news lady doing a report on how dangerous weed is immediately stopped, looked at the camera, said "FK it, I quit," and walked out. Now she owns a very successful weed store. Or the weather lady who had to cover up her shoulders because men kept calling in, saying it was inspired. Good news is that the news anchors dragged those men through the mud. The woman who said "I quit" was the president of a pretty big legalized marijuana organization, and the news channel was unaware if I remember right. She finally got fed up with everything. The tragic death of Aussie cricketer Philip Hughes by a bouncer, bowled cricket ball, to the neck. The footage at the exact moment went to TV and in hindsight it was absolutely shocking. Vale PH. That was horrific. I only heard that night on the news, but the replays were sickening to see. Seeing it in real time would have been surreal. As a kid, I saw the dude that robbed a bank, but I believed he was forced to do it, with a bomb locked around his neck blow up while kneeled in front of the cop car. Great doc made about that called Evil Genos. One of the Spice Girls was on a morning show with Reba McEntire and she complimented and then imitated her accent and said I am white trash in that southern drawl. The wide-eyed looks of the guest hosts and a sudden cut to commercial. For the life of me, I can't find that crap anywhere. This is one that's pretty specific to Australians, but we had a show about our type of football called, funnily enough, The Footy Show. It was one of the highest rating shows in the country, so this had probably hundreds of thousands of viewers. Two of the long-standing panelists are former legendary players Sam Newman, who at the time would have been in his 50s 60s. It was the early mid-2000s I think, and Shane Crawford. Long story short, Sam had been talking mad crap for the entire episode to everyone including Crawford, and at one point changed his outfit into a jersey and shorts for a bit. He stood next to Crawford while continuing to argue with another panelist, at which point Crawford pantsed him on live TV. Now, this revealed the briefs Sam was wearing underneath. You could see Crawford thinking he's not been humiliated enough. Frick it, and pantsed him again, pulling down the briefs and showing the entire country a 60-year-old man's rather small dong. Side note, if you ever want to Google what a piece of crap Sam Newman is, feel free, it's a good read. On Fox, they were following a car chase. Helicopter stayed right on the car as he went off-road. Cops backed off. He pulled over. All the while Shepard Smith is narrating. He's pulled over. He's getting out of the car. He has something in his hands. Stop filming. Cut away. Cut away now, and the guy shot himself right there. Live on Fox. I think they stopped filming car chases after that. Theresa May giving a speech on how strong and stable her government is while in the background her party's logo falls off bit by bit. Right after Kobe Bryant died, the local news was showing clips of him playing basketball while reporting on it, but it was clips of his worst plays, missed layups, bad passes, air balls. I remember the first footage coming out of Christchurch during the live broadcast after the earthquake of the 22nd of February, 2011, in which a woman was being helped away from a collapsed building by some people with what I assume to be a chunk of her scalp hanging from her hair and blood running down her face. The camera turned and her brother was being pulled up from the rubble and carried off, very obviously dead. They replayed that for a little while, but now all the stock footage is of the woman. Second one would be a plainclothes police officer watching a car drive up to the cordon in the first couple of hours after the mosque shootings. Also Christchurch, the 2010s was not kind to that city, and the officer began to raise his rifle to the point where he was about to fire into the car before it turned around and drove off. First and only time I've ever seen a police officer aim an assault rifle and almost fire into a car on live television. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.